The morning sun cast long shadows across the entrance of Blackwood Military Base as Private Marcus Thompson began his shift at the main security checkpoint. At 22 years old, Marcus took his duties seriously, perhaps more seriously than some of his fellow guards appreciated. He had been stationed at Blackwood for only 8 months, but he had already earned a reputation for being thorough, sometimes to a fault. The base buzzed with its usual morning activity. Soldiers in crisp uniforms walked purposefully between buildings, their boots creating a rhythmic percussion on the concrete pathways. Delivery trucks lined up at the commercial entrance, waiting for inspection before being allowed to proceed to the supply depot. Everything operated like clockwork, just the way Marcus liked it. As he adjusted his uniform and checked his clipboard for the day's scheduled arrivals, Marcus noticed a woman approaching the pedestrian gate. She appeared to be in her early 50s, with graying hair pulled back in a simple ponytail. She wore civilian clothes, dark jeans, a plain white blouse, and comfortable walking shoes. What struck Marcus as odd was her casual demeanor as she approached the highly secured entrance. The woman walked with confidence, her posture straight and her stride purposeful. She carried a small leather briefcase and wore dark sunglasses despite the early morning hour. As she drew closer, Marcus could see that she had an air of authority about her, though he couldn't quite place what it was that gave him that impression. "Good morning," the woman said pleasantly as she reached the checkpoint. Her voice was calm and measured, with just a hint of what might have been a southern accent. "I need to enter the base." Marcus straightened up and gave her his most professional smile. "Good morning, ma'am. I'll need to see your military identification and any visitor authorization documents you might have." The woman paused for a moment, seeming almost surprised by the request. She reached into her briefcase and began searching through its contents. After a few moments, she looked up at Marcus with what appeared to be mild frustration. "I seem to have left my identification in my other bag," she said, her tone still pleasant but with an edge of impatience creeping in. "I'm sure we can work something out. I really do need to get inside." Marcus shook his head politely but firmly. "I'm sorry, ma'am, but base regulations are very clear. No one enters without proper identification and authorization. No exceptions." The woman studied Marcus for a moment, her expression thoughtful. "Young man, what's your name?" "Private Thompson, ma'am." "Private Thompson, I appreciate your dedication to following protocol, but I assure you that my presence here is both expected and necessary. Perhaps you could call your supervisor?" Marcus felt a twinge of uncertainty. The woman's confidence was unsettling, and there was something about the way she spoke that suggested she was accustomed to having her requests accommodated without question. However, his training had been clear and unambiguous. Security protocols existed for a reason, and they applied to everyone, regardless of how important they might claim to be. "Ma'am, I understand your frustration, but I cannot allow anyone to enter the base without proper identification. If you could return with the appropriate documents, I'd be happy to process your entry then." The woman's expression hardened slightly. "Private Thompson, I don't think you understand the situation. I have important business on this base, and I cannot afford to waste time driving home to retrieve documents." "I'm sorry, ma'am, but those are the rules." As their conversation continued, other personnel began to notice the exchange. Sergeant Williams, who was supervising the vehicle checkpoint nearby, glanced over with curiosity. He had been stationed at Blackwood for 5 years and prided himself on knowing most of the regular visitors and personnel. The woman looked vaguely familiar, but he couldn't quite place her. The morning traffic at the gate was beginning to build up. A line of military personnel returning from leave formed behind the woman, their patience beginning to wear thin as the delay continued. Marcus felt the pressure mounting but remained steadfast in his position. "Ma'am, I really must insist that you step aside and allow me to process the other personnel waiting. You're welcome to use the phone in the visitor center to contact whoever you're supposed to meet. They can come to the gate and verify your identity." The woman's jaw tightened almost imperceptibly. "Private Thompson, you're making a very big mistake." Despite the warning tone in her voice, Marcus held his ground. "Ma'am, I'm simply doing my job.
Security is not something we take lightly here.
Lieutenant Colonel Harrison, who had been reviewing duty rosters in the guard office, emerged to see what was causing the commotion. He observed the scene with growing interest, noting the woman's bearing and the way she seemed to radiate authority even in civilian clothes.
Is there a problem here, Private Thompson? Harrison asked as he approached.
Sir, this woman is requesting entry to the base but cannot provide proper identification or authorization documents. Harrison looked at the woman more carefully. Something about her seemed familiar, but he couldn't quite place it.
Ma'am, perhaps I could be of assistance. Who are you here to see?
The woman turned to face Harrison, and, for a moment, her expression softened. I'm here for the quarterly readiness review meeting. It was scheduled for 0900 hours. Harrison checked his watch. It was already 0830, and he knew that the quarterly reviews were high-priority meetings attended by senior staff. However, protocol was protocol, and he had to support his guard's decision. I'm sorry, ma'am, but we really do need to see some form of identification.
Perhaps your office can fax or email a copy of your credentials?
The woman sighed deeply, a sound that carried both frustration and what might have been amusement. Lieutenant Colonel, with all due respect, that would be highly irregular. As the standoff continued, more personnel began to gather, curious about what could be keeping the gate tied up for so long. Word began to spread through the nearby buildings that someone was being denied entry, though no one yet knew who the mysterious woman was. Captain Rodriguez, who was passing by on her way to the morning briefing, paused to observe the situation. She had been stationed at several bases throughout her career and had learned to recognize the subtle signs of rank and authority. The way the woman carried herself, the confidence in her voice, and her obvious expectation of deference all suggested someone of significant importance.
What's the situation? Rodriguez quietly asked Sergeant Williams.
Some woman trying to get on base without proper ID.
Thompson's holding firm on protocol.
Rodriguez studied the woman more intently. There was definitely something familiar about her, but she couldn't quite put her finger on what it was. Meanwhile, Marcus was beginning to feel the weight of the attention his decision was attracting. While he remained confident that he was following proper procedure, the fact that senior officers were now involved made him question whether he might be missing something important. The woman seemed to sense his growing uncertainty.
Private Thompson, I want you to know that I'm not angry with you. You're following your training, and that's commendable.
However, I do think we need to resolve this situation quickly. Her tone had become more measured, almost maternal, which somehow made Marcus feel even more uncertain about his position. Still, he had been taught that when in doubt, err on the side of security. Ma'am, I appreciate your understanding, but I really cannot make any exceptions. The woman nodded slowly, a small smile playing at the corners of her mouth.
Very well, Private Thompson. You've certainly proven your commitment to your duties.
As the clock ticked closer to 0900 hours, the tension at the gate continued to build. The woman remained calm and patient, but it was clear that whatever meeting she was supposed to attend was growing closer by the minute. The situation at the gate was becoming increasingly tense as more senior personnel arrived to assess what was happening. Major Peterson, the base security chief, had been notified of the unusual delay and made his way to the entrance to personally handle the matter. He was a stern man with 20 years of military service, known for his unwavering commitment to protocol and security. As Peterson approached, he could see the growing crowd of onlookers and the obvious frustration building among the personnel waiting to enter the base. The woman stood calmly at the center of the commotion, her posture unchanged despite the mounting pressure around her.
Private Thompson, report, Peterson commanded as he arrived at the checkpoint. Marcus snapped to attention.
Sir, this civilian is requesting entry to the base but has failed to provide proper identification or authorization documents.
I have denied entry in accordance with base security protocols.
Peterson turned his attention to the woman, studying her carefully. Like the others before him, he felt there was something familiar about her, but he couldn't quite identify what it was. Her calm demeanor in the face of what was clearly becoming a significant incident struck him as unusual.
Ma'am, I'm Major Peterson, base security chief. I understand you're having some difficulty with entry procedures today.
The woman smiled politely.
Major Peterson, yes, it seems there's been a small misunderstanding.
I'm expected for a meeting at 0900 hours, and time is becoming rather critical.
I see. And you don't have any identification with you today? Unfortunately, no.
It was an oversight on my part.
Peterson frowned.
The quarterly readiness review meetings were indeed critical events, typically attended by high-ranking personnel from both within the base and from regional command. However, he had never known anyone of sufficient rank to attend such meetings to arrive without an escort or proper credentials.
Ma'am, can you tell me who specifically you're supposed to meet with? The woman's eyes twinkled with what might have been amusement.
I believe the meeting is with the base command staff, including Colonel Matthews and his senior officers. At the mention of the base commander's name, several of the gathered personnel exchanged glances. Colonel Matthews was known to be extremely punctual and did not appreciate delays or disruptions to scheduled meetings. If this woman was indeed expected at a meeting with him, her delay at the gate could have serious consequences for everyone involved. However, Peterson remained skeptical. In his experience, anyone important enough to meet directly with the base commander would travel with an escort or would have been included on the daily access list. The fact that this woman had simply appeared at the gate alone, without identification, suggested either a serious breach of protocol or a case of mistaken identity. Ma'am, I'm going to need to verify your identity through other means.
Would you be willing to provide your social security number so we can run a background check?
The woman paused, considering the request. Major, I understand your position, but I think we both know that conducting a background check at the gate is neither practical nor appropriate given the circumstances. Her refusal to provide additional identification only deepened Peterson's suspicions. By this point, word of the incident had spread throughout the base, and several off-duty personnel had gathered to watch the unusual spectacle of someone being denied entry for nearly an hour. Sergeant First Class Martinez, who worked in the base administration office, pushed through the crowd to get a better look at the woman. He had been processing visitor authorizations for the past 3 years and prided himself on his attention to detail. Something about the situation nagged at him, but he couldn't quite put his finger on what it was. As he studied the woman's face, a memory began to surface. He had seen that face before, but not in person. Where had he seen it? It was driving him crazy that he couldn't place it. Meanwhile, the base public address system crackled to life with the morning announcements. The voice of the duty officer echoed across the installation as he read through the day's schedule, including a reminder about the important quarterly readiness review meeting scheduled for 0900 hours in the main conference room. The woman checked her watch and looked at Peterson with growing impatience. Major, I really must insist that we find a solution to this situation.
The meeting I'm supposed to attend is extremely important.
Ma'am, I understand your concern, but security protocols exist for good reasons. We've had several incidents in recent months where individuals attempted to gain unauthorized access to the base by claiming to have meetings with senior personnel. The woman nodded understandingly. Of course, and I commend the diligence of your security team. Private Thompson here has shown exemplary dedication to his duties. Marcus felt a strange mix of pride and confusion at the compliment. While he was glad that his commitment to protocol was being recognized, he was becoming increasingly worried that he might be making a terrible mistake. Captain Rodriguez, who had been quietly observing the situation, suddenly had an idea.
Ma'am, if you don't mind me asking, what was your last duty station?
The woman turned to face Rodriguez with interest.
I've served at several installations over the years.
Most recently, I was at Fort Hamilton before my current assignment.
Rodriguez's eyes widened slightly.
Fort Hamilton was home to the regional command headquarters, where only the most senior personnel were stationed.
This piece of information added another layer of intrigue to the woman's identity. And what was your role at Fort Hamilton? Rodriguez pressed. Strategic planning and resource allocation, the woman replied simply.
The vague nature of her response did little to clarify matters for the gathered personnel. Strategic planning could encompass a wide range of responsibilities, from junior analyst positions to senior command roles. By this time, the delay had created a significant backup at all the base entrances. Personnel arriving for the day shift were forced to wait as word spread about the unusual situation at the main gate. Some expressed frustration at the delay, while others were simply curious about what could possibly be keeping security tied up for so long. Lieutenant Williams, who served as the base public affairs officer, received a phone call from the local newspaper inquiring about reports of an incident at the base entrance. Military installations were always of interest to local media, and any unusual activity tended to attract attention quickly. "I'm sorry, but I don't have any information about an incident at this time," Williams told the reporter, though he made a mental note to investigate the situation himself. As Williams made his way toward the main gate, he passed several groups of personnel discussing the ongoing situation. The rumor mill was already in full swing, with theories ranging from a confused civilian to a potential security threat. Back at the gate, Major Peterson was beginning to feel the pressure from multiple directions. He had a duty to maintain security, but he also knew that if this woman was indeed expected at an important meeting, the consequences of the delay could be severe. "Ma'am, I'm going to contact the administration office to see if we can verify your expected attendance at today's meeting. Would that be acceptable?" The woman smiled. "That would be fine, Major. I'm sure they can clear this up quickly." As Peterson reached for his radio to contact the administration office, Sergeant Martinez suddenly stepped forward, his face pale with realization. "Major Peterson, sir, I think I know who this is." All eyes turned to Martinez as he approached the woman with obvious nervousness. "Ma'am, forgive me for asking, but are you General Patricia Hawthorne?" The woman's smile broadened, and, for the first time since the incident began, she seemed genuinely amused. "Well, Sergeant Martinez, it took someone long enough to recognize me." The words hit the gathered crowd like a thunderbolt. General Patricia Hawthorne was not just any general, she was the newly appointed commanding general of the entire regional district, making her the highest-ranking officer in a three-state area. Her appointment had been announced just 2 weeks earlier, and her photograph had been circulated in official communications throughout the command. The color drained from Major Peterson's face as the implications of the situation became clear. They had been detaining a 3-star general for nearly an hour based on a security protocol technicality. Private Thompson felt his knees go weak as the realization hit him. He had been arguing with a general for the better part of an hour, refusing her entry to a base that was now under her ultimate command. The silence that followed Martinez's identification was deafening. Every person present suddenly understood the magnitude of what had just transpired. The woman they had been treating as a potential security risk was actually the most senior military officer in the region. The revelation of General Hawthorne's identity sent shockwaves through the crowd gathered at the gate. Major Peterson immediately snapped to attention, his face flushed with embarrassment and concern about the potential consequences of the prolonged detention of such a high-ranking officer. "General Hawthorne, ma'am, we had no idea," Peterson stammered, his usual composure completely shattered. "Please accept my sincerest apologies for this inexcusable delay." General Hawthorne raised her hand gently, a gesture that somehow managed to be both authoritative and reassuring. "Major Peterson, there's no need for panic. While the situation is certainly unusual, I want to be very clear that Private Thompson here was doing exactly what he was trained to do." She turned to look at Marcus, who stood frozen in horrified realization of what had transpired. The young private's face had gone completely white, and his hands trembled slightly as he maintained his position at attention. "Private Thompson," the general said, her voice calm and measured, "look at me." Marcus forced himself to meet her gaze, expecting to see anger or disappointment. Instead, he found something entirely unexpected: approval. "Son, in my 30 years of military service, I have seen countless examples of security failures caused by personnel who were too eager to accommodate someone who claimed to be important. You followed protocol without exception, even under significant pressure. That is exactly the kind of dedication we need protecting our installations." The crowd around them listened in stunned silence. Many had expected a severe reprimand or worse for the young private who had unknowingly challenged a 3-star general. Instead, they were witnessing something remarkable, a senior officer taking responsibility for the situation and praising the very person who had caused her such inconvenience. "But, ma'am," Marcus managed to say, his voice barely above a whisper, "I delayed you for almost an hour." "Your meeting." General Hawthorne glanced at her watch and, then, smiled. "Private, that meeting was a test of this base's readiness and security procedures. Your actions today have provided me with invaluable information about the effectiveness of our protocols and the caliber of our personnel." Major Peterson's eyes widened as he began to understand the implications of what the general was saying. "Ma'am, are you saying that this was intentional?" "Not entirely," General Hawthorne admitted. "I did genuinely forget my identification this morning, a mistake I don't usually make. However, when I realized what had happened, I decided to see how the situation would be handled. I must say, I'm impressed with what I've observed." She gestured toward Marcus. "This young man demonstrated integrity, commitment to duty, and courage under pressure. These are exactly the qualities we want in our security personnel." The relief visible on Peterson's face was palpable, though he still seemed uncertain about the ramifications of the incident. "General, what should we do about the delay to your meeting?" "The meeting can wait," General Hawthorne replied firmly. "What we've learned here today is far more valuable than any scheduled briefing." As word of the general's identity spread throughout the base, more personnel began arriving at the gate area. News traveled fast in military communities, and the story of the guard who refused entry to a 3-star general was already becoming legendary. Colonel Matthews, the base commander, received word of the situation and immediately rushed to the gate. He arrived breathless and visibly panicked, having heard only that a visiting general had been detained at security for over an hour. "General Hawthorne, ma'am," he said as he approached, snapping to attention. "I cannot express how sorry I am about this incident. I take full responsibility for the failure in our procedures." General Hawthorne turned to face the base commander with an expression that was both stern and understanding. "Colonel Matthews, before you accept responsibility for anything, I want you to understand exactly what happened here today." She proceeded to explain the morning's events from her perspective, emphasizing Private Thompson's adherence to protocol and the professional manner in which all personnel had handled the situation. "Your security team performed exactly as they should have," she concluded. "They protected this installation from potential threats, regardless of any claims made by unauthorized individuals." "That includes me." Colonel Matthews looked confused. "Ma'am, I don't understand. You're saying this was acceptable?" "Colonel, when I take command of this district next week, I need to know that every installation under my authority maintains the highest security standards. What I witnessed today gives me confidence that Blackwood Base is properly protected." The crowd around them had grown considerably as off-duty personnel heard about the unprecedented situation. Many had never seen a 3-star general in person, much less witnessed one engaged in such an unusual circumstance. Sergeant Martinez, who had been the first to identify the general, approached hesitantly. "Ma'am, if I may ask, how did you expect to enter the base without identification?" General Hawthorne smiled at the question. "Honestly, Sergeant, I didn't have a plan. I realized my mistake when I arrived, but I was curious to see how the situation would develop. In my experience, you learn more about an organization by observing how it handles unexpected challenges than by reviewing standard operating procedures." Captain Rodriguez, emboldened by the general's approachable demeanor, asked, "General, what would have happened if Private Thompson had allowed you to enter without proper identification?" The question drew the attention of everyone present. The answer would reveal much about the general's expectations and priorities. "Captain, if Private Thompson had bent the rules for me, even knowing my rank, it would have indicated a fundamental flaw in security protocol implementation. It would have suggested that this base's personnel could be influenced to compromise security for individuals who claim authority." She paused and looked directly at Marcus again. "Instead, what I found was a young soldier who understood that security protocols exist to protect us all, and that true military discipline means following those protocols regardless of personal consequences." The implication of her words was clear to everyone present. Private Thompson's perceived mistake had actually been the correct course of action, and any deviation from protocol would have been viewed as a serious security failure. Lieutenant Williams, the public affairs officer, realized that this incident could become a significant story, both within military circles and, potentially, in civilian media.
General, how would you like us to handle any inquiries about today's events? Lieutenant, this incident should serve as a case study in proper security procedures.
I want every person on this base to understand that following protocol is never a mistake, regardless of who might be inconvenienced by it. As the immediate crisis passed and personnel began to disperse, General Hawthorne made an unexpected announcement. I want to commend not just Private Thompson, but every member of the security team who was involved in today's events. Major Peterson, Sergeant Williams, and all the others who supported the proper implementation of security protocols. Your professionalism under unusual circumstances reflects well on this installation. The praise was unexpected and deeply appreciated by the security personnel, who had spent the last hour worried about potential disciplinary action. However, General Hawthorne wasn't finished. There is one thing that concerns me about today's events, and that's the length of time it took for someone to identify me. While I appreciate that I was in civilian clothes, my photograph has been distributed throughout the command.
The observation sent a subtle chill through the crowd.
While the general had praised the security response, she had also identified an area for improvement, the need for personnel to be more familiar with senior leadership. I'll be addressing this with all installation commanders in the district, she continued. Personnel need to be able to recognize their senior leadership, not just for protocol purposes, but for security reasons as well. As the morning progressed and the situation returned to normal, it became clear that the events at the gate would be remembered and discussed for years to come. The story of the young private who refused entry to a general would become part of base lore, serving as a reminder that doing the right thing sometimes requires courage and conviction. In the days following the incident at the gate, word spread rapidly throughout the military community about the young private who had unknowingly detained a 3-star general. The story took on a life of its own, growing with each retelling and becoming a symbol of unwavering dedication to duty. Private Marcus Thompson found himself thrust into an unexpected spotlight. Personnel from other units began visiting Blackwood Base specifically to meet the guard who had stood his ground against a general. While Marcus was initially uncomfortable with the attention, he began to understand the broader implications of what had transpired. General Hawthorne, true to her word, used the incident as a teaching moment throughout her new command. She visited installations across her district, sharing the story and emphasizing the importance of consistent security protocols. At each base, she made it clear that following proper procedures was not just encouraged but expected, regardless of who might be inconvenienced. 3 weeks after the incident, General Hawthorne returned to Blackwood Base for her formal assumption of command ceremony. The event was attended by military personnel from across the region, as well as local government officials and community leaders. As part of the ceremony, General Hawthorne made a point of recognizing several personnel who had demonstrated exceptional performance during her initial evaluation of district facilities. To everyone's surprise and Marcus's amazement, he was called forward to receive a commendation for outstanding security performance.
Private Thompson, General Hawthorne announced to the assembled crowd, demonstrated that true military bearing means doing what is right, not what is convenient.
His actions serve as an example to all of us about the importance of maintaining standards regardless of circumstances.
The commendation ceremony became another legendary moment at Blackwood Base.
For Marcus, it represented validation that his decision to follow protocol had been correct, even when he had doubted himself during those tense moments at the gate. Major Peterson, who had initially been terrified about the potential consequences of the incident, found that his security program became a model for other installations in the district. General Hawthorne frequently cited Blackwood's security procedures as an example of how protocols should be implemented and maintained. The incident also had unexpected consequences for base personnel awareness training. General Hawthorne implemented new requirements for leadership recognition training, ensuring that personnel throughout her command could identify senior officers. The training became known informally as Don't Pull a Thompson Sessions, though the name was meant affectionately rather than critically. Colonel Matthews discovered that the incident had actually enhanced his reputation rather than damaging it. The fact that his personnel had maintained security protocols under unusual circumstances was viewed favorably by higher command. The base received recognition for operational excellence, and Matthews was selected for promotion consideration ahead of schedule. For Sergeant Martinez, who had finally identified the general, the incident became a source of both pride and humor. He was credited with saving the base by recognizing General Hawthorne, though he privately admitted that it had taken him far too long to make the connection. The story reached beyond military circles when a local newspaper picked up the tale and published an article about the general and the guard. The piece portrayed the incident as an example of military professionalism and dedication to duty. The positive coverage helped improve the base's relationship with the surrounding community. Marcus found that his career trajectory had been significantly altered by the events of that morning. His demonstrated commitment to duty and ability to perform under pressure led to recommendations for advanced training and leadership development programs. What could have been a career-ending mistake had instead become a career-defining moment. Several months later, when Marcus was promoted to specialist, General Hawthorne made a surprise appearance at the ceremony. Her presence underscored the lasting impact of their initial encounter and demonstrated her continued commitment to recognizing excellence in the ranks. "Specialist Thompson," she said during the ceremony, "your actions that day reminded all of us why we have protocols and why following them is essential to our mission. You upheld the highest standards of military service, and I'm proud to pin these new rank insignia on your uniform." The promotion ceremony was attended by personnel from across the base, many of whom had been present during the original incident. For them, it represented the completion of a remarkable story about courage, integrity, and the importance of doing what is right. The gate where the incident occurred became something of a landmark on the base. New personnel were often brought there during orientation tours and told the story of the day when proper protocol was more important than rank or convenience. A small plaque was eventually installed near the checkpoint, reading simply, "Excellence in security, following protocol protects everyone." General Hawthorne's leadership style became well known throughout her command for emphasizing accountability, consistency, and recognition of outstanding performance regardless of rank. The incident at Blackwood Base had provided her with a perfect example of the standards she expected from all personnel. Years later, when Marcus had advanced to become a sergeant himself and was responsible for training new security personnel, he would tell the story of his encounter with General Hawthorne. He emphasized to his trainees that doing the right thing sometimes requires courage, especially when facing pressure to compromise standards. "I was terrified that I was making a huge mistake," he would tell new guards. "But I had been trained to follow protocol, and that training served me well." Never let anyone convince you to compromise security, no matter who they claim to be. The lesson became part of the standard security training curriculum, not just at Blackwood Base but throughout the district. General Hawthorne had ensured that the incident would continue to serve as a teaching tool for future generations of military personnel. The story also became a favorite among military families, who saw in it an example of how dedication to duty and integrity could lead to recognition and advancement. Parents would tell their children about the young soldier who followed the rules and ended up being commended by a general. For General Hawthorne herself, the incident represented everything she valued about military service: professionalism, integrity, and unwavering commitment to mission accomplishment. She often reflected on how a simple mistake in forgetting her identification had led to such a powerful demonstration of the values she sought to instill throughout her command. The quarterly readiness review meeting that had been delayed by the incident at the gate eventually took place, but it was overshadowed by the more significant lessons learned about security procedures and personnel performance. The formal review confirmed what General Hawthorne had already observed: Blackwood Base was a well-run installation with dedicated personnel. In her final evaluation of the base, General Hawthorne wrote, "The security incident during my initial visit demonstrated the highest levels of professionalism and adherence to protocol. The personnel involved showed that proper training, clear standards, and strong leadership produce exactly the kind of performance we need throughout our military." The incident at the gate had begun as an embarrassing mistake but had evolved into something much more significant, a defining moment that illustrated the importance of integrity, protocol, and doing what is right regardless of circumstances. It served as a reminder that in the military, as in life, character is revealed not in moments of comfort but in times of challenge and pressure. For everyone involved, from Private Thompson to General Hawthorne herself, the morning at the gate became a touchstone for what military service should represent: excellence, integrity, and an unwavering commitment to duty above personal convenience or comfort.